All right, let's give it a little bit of a soft launch right here. First gear. Oh, that is absolutely brutal. Oh yeah. That is a good time indeed. And welcome back to another video here on the Auto Wisdom YouTube channel. Today I have the absolute pleasure of sitting behind the wheel of a very unique car, which is the Mercedes-Benz GLA 45 AMG of the X156 chassis. While I think this car was initially branded as somewhat of a crossover, this car really, in all its glory, is a hot hatch. And it is a very slept on hot hatch in my opinion, because it has a lot of interesting performance metrics to boast and a lot of hardware that backs this thing up for some good power. So before we take this thing out for a drive, let's dive into a quick technical overview of the car and what Mercedes-AMG did to boost up the GLA 45 over a standard GLA 250 at the time. In the GLA 45 AMG, we get a 2-liter twin-scroll turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that is codenamed the M133. It outputs 355 horsepower and 332 pound-feet of torque in this particular example, and the turbocharger outputs a whopping 26.5 pounds of boost. Later build dates actually got a power increase to 375 horsepower and 350 torque, which is a lot of power coming out of a turbocharged 4-cylinder, and at the time it was the most powerful production 4-cylinder engine in the world. The M133 features an all-aluminum crankcase with 4 valves per cylinder, direct injection, a forged crankshaft and pistons. The low temperature cooling circuit and the air-to-water intercooler are all borrowed directly off of the SLS AMG as well. Now this engine is mated up to a 7-speed speed shift dual clutch automatic gearbox with all-wheel drive. We also get Brembo brakes up front with some ventilated and cross-drilled rotors, 10-spoke AMG lightweight alloy wheels, and the AMG Sport suspension, which features a McPherson strut up at the front axle with stiffer steering knuckles and a 4-link setup in the rear axle with optimized elastokinematics, specially tuned springs and dampers, and beefier anti-roll bars. The GLA 45 actually sits about 1.8 inches lower than a GLA 250, which makes this thing significantly sportier overall. And then finally, we cannot forget the exterior elements that really help to aid in the sporty design of this car, such as those canards up front, the revised front fascia with bigger air intakes and a unique AMG grille, the rear spoiler out back, or rear wing I should say, which helps to produce added downforce, the rear diffuser, and the quad exhaust unit. And you guys will see this car actually sounds pretty freaking awesome. So I'm actually going to roll the windows down right here. Listen to this. The GLA 45 AMG has so much character behind it, and it's hilarious because this car really seems to sort of stray away from the typical AMG formula. It's not necessarily a brute in a suit, but rather a hot hatch that is filled with personality and charisma. This car has so much character in the way that it drives and the way that it sounds. The M133 engine not only pulls hard and has torque on tap as early as 2200 RPM in the rev range, but it also just sounds awesome. It's got so much character in regard to the exhaust note itself. It has a lot of pitch, especially as you bring it higher towards the 6200 RPM red line. And paired up with this DCT gearbox, this thing flies. It is so freaking quick. I also feel very confident when driving this car due to the incredible all-wheel drive system that just allows for a lot of grip on tap at all times. It's not a particularly advanced all-wheel drive system, but it gets the job done and does what you need to, particularly on the street, where if you're going to be daily driving this car, you just want to be able to have confidence when you're behind the wheel. In different types of weather conditions, this is going to get the job done with absolute ease. And you get a nice like brap, like a nice snap sound on each upshift, especially as you approach redline, and it's just so exciting to drive. The DCT itself is also very quick. The paddle response is right on par with some of the best DCT transmissions that I've personally had the chance of experiencing. Now at low speeds it is a little bit clunky, and you do have to kind of feather the throttle a little bit to get the car going. But when you're driving this car in a performance-oriented manner, particularly if you were to do some track days in this thing, you're not going to have any issues with the gearbox itself. It's so snappy. It rev matches perfectly on the downshifts. You do get a little bit of a thump as well on each upshift, which really helps to add to some of that character. And I just love how meaty the 4-cylinder sounds out of this. The suspension is also quite firm, especially if you compare it to a conventional GLA 250, where it's extremely soft and plush and I mean, there's nothing about that car that's performance oriented. This feels like an entirely different car. Not only are the bushings stiffer, but the beefier anti-roll bars definitely help to get rid of that body roll. Let's roll those windows down. Oh, that is so much fun. And the stiffer spring rates do a great job of really allowing you to experience the entirety of this car's performance. And listen to that. It sounds so freaking angry. I love it. I also want to touch on the design of this car, because from an exterior standpoint, it's kind of a shouty car. It's not particularly subtle, kind of as I touched on at the beginning of this review, whereas a lot of AMG products sort of disguise their bruteness. This car really embraces it, particularly with an example like this one that has the multi-spoke AMG performance wheels, that also has the wing and the canards and all the little performance bits going for it to really help to dazzle up the exterior styling of the car. And it makes for a car that not only looks good from a design standpoint, but also turns some heads on the road. Compared to the Volkswagen GTI that I reviewed last week, and I'll throw a card up to the review if any of you are interested in viewing that video as well, I mean, this thing feels significantly faster. It feels pretty much on par with that Audi S3 that I had reviewed, and that car actually had a stage 1 tune and had a proper cold air intake as well. This car stock feels right on par with it power-wise. And once again, just paired with the all-wheel drive and DCT setup, it just helps to extract the maximum amount of performance out of the M133 engine. Now, this car does have quite an advanced cooling system between the air-to-water intercooling setup, between all the radiators and heat exchangers that are pretty much pulled directly off the SLS AMG, which was the brand's flagship supercar at the time. It has a lot going for it in the way of cooling because, you know, to get 350 plus horsepower out of a 2-liter turbocharged engine from the factory in a production car that is going to feature a warranty, you know, you have to beef the hell out of the engine and make sure that temperatures are being sustained optimally at all times, regardless of the conditions that the vehicle is being driven on. And this car really is no exception. In this little infotainment screen right here, I do have a nice readout of not only the gear that I'm in, but I can also very clearly see my oil temperature, my water temp, and the gearbox temperature as well, which is really nice to have those readouts on tap. Now that actually brings me to the interior of this car, which is pretty nice overall. The smaller hatchback-like proportions of the vehicle make it very easy to drive, very easy to zip around, especially if you're in an urban environment with a lot of city traffic, and if you're parking frequently, it's going to be really easy to do all of that in this car. I love the gauge cluster. It is the classic AMG analog gauge cluster where you've got a nice and aggressive looking speedometer on the left and a beautiful tachometer on the right as well, with these little carbon fiber inlays. That's awesome. This center section with the infotainment screen and all these buttons does feel quite dated. This little iPad mini tablet like display is old. The graphics are pretty much out of date completely, but it's okay. I mean, it's really, that's not exactly why you're going to be buying this car. Ultimately, you know, you're going to get this car for its performance characteristics, and believe me, it most definitely delivers in that regard. Even as a car that's coming up on 10 years old, the performance still feels relatively staggering for a hot hatch vehicle. The steering wheel is nice, and I do like the perforated leather on the 9 and 3 sections of the wheel. Very small plastic paddle shifters that I wish were a little more prominent and, you know, were made of aluminum, kind of like in the C63S that I had driven. But for what it is, I mean, you're really not going to be complaining all that much, and you can always resort to the aftermarket for some upgrades in that department. And these seats do a great job of bolstering you in. Now, unfortunately, this car is not equipped with the AMG Recaro bucket seats that look absolutely phenomenal. They're featured in everything from the C63S all the way up to a car like the AMG GTR, and you could also get them in the GLA. But even these standard base model seats do a good job of holding you in. They have decent torso support, but the thigh support is lacking somewhat, but they are very plush and soft, and they do feel quite comfortable. So it makes the overall driving experience quite lovely, and truthfully, I feel like I could cover very long distances in this little hot hatch, and I'm not really gonna feel all that tired. Unfortunately, this AMG GLA 45 is not equipped with the factory AMG performance exhaust, which I really wish it was fitted with, because this engine sounds really good for a 4-cylinder. Like I said, it's got a lot of character. The gearbox makes these awesome like snaps on the upshifts, and when you're downshifting with the DCT, you get some subtle overrun and a little bit of popcorn. It sounds really nice and it's sporty, and I do think that this car could have definitely benefited from a performance exhaust. And those Brembo performance brakes do an awesome job of slowing you down easily. This car is not particularly light at around 3,550 pounds, but you have so much that AMG did to beef up the performance of the chassis and the car that you just don't feel like the curb weight is necessarily an impeding factor. Now, what's crazy to me is that the X156 chassis of the GLA 45 AMG, the first gen, is a car that just seems to have been forgotten by so many enthusiasts across the board, and it just doesn't seem like a car that gets much coverage nowadays. And people that are in the market for a hot hatch are generally looking at cars like a Civic Type R or a GR Corolla or a Golf R, and they seem to forget that this car exists. And what's even crazier is that used higher mileage examples you can pick up for like just over 15K, which is an absolute bargain in my opinion in regard to how much of a genuine performance car you are getting for the money. I suppose Mercedes-Benz didn't produce a ton of them, and I don't know the exact production figures off the top of my head, but nonetheless, this is definitely a car that is worth considering, and definitely a worthy addition to anybody's garage if they appreciate cars of this type. Now, with all that being said, that is going to wrap it up for this review on the GLA 45 AMG. I hope you all enjoyed very much, and if you did, if you could go ahead and leave a like on this video, as well as subscribe to my channel down below if you are new here, I would appreciate that very much so. And with all that being said, I look forward to catching you all in the next one. Take it easy, my friends. Bye-bye.